It's 1347. You're a merchant in Messina, Sicily, and a ship is just pulled into your harbor from the Black Sea. You walk down to the docks the way you always do, looking for goods, looking for news, looking for anything worth knowing. And then you stop. Because the sailors on that ship are either dead or dying, covered in black swellings the size of eggs, oozing blood and pus from their skin. Their faces the color of a bruise. The port authorities take one look at this situation and make what is honestly a very reasonable decision. They order the ships out of the harbor immediately. Back into the sea, gone. The problem is, it's already too late. Whatever came off those ships has already made it onto the docks, and over the next 5 years, it will kill somewhere between 30 and 60% of every human being alive in Europe. So let's talk about what you're actually dealing with. The disease itself is caused by a bacterium called Yersinia pestis. It's tiny, invisible, and it does not care about you at all. There are 3 main forms of the plague. Bubonic, which attacks your lymph nodes and creates those famous swellings called buboes. Septicemic, which gets into your bloodstream directly and is essentially a death sentence within hours. And pneumonic, which hits your lungs and means you can spread it just by breathing near someone. In the 14th century, obviously nobody knows any of this. Germ theory won't exist for another 500 years. You don't know what a bacterium is. You don't know what a lymph node is doing. You just know people are dying, fast, and nobody can explain why. Here's where your options get genuinely grim. Because the medieval explanation for what's happening to your city is not bacteria. It's one of a few competing theories, none of which are going to help you survive. The dominant medical thinking of the era, based on ancient Greek ideas still being taught in European universities in the 1340s, is that disease comes from miasma, bad air. Corrupted, rotten, poisonous air rising from swamps or decaying bodies or unfavorable alignments of the planets. The University of Paris issued an official report in 1348 blaming the outbreak on a triple conjunction of Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars in the sign of Aquarius on March 20th, 1345. That's the medical establishment's best answer. A planetary meeting that happened 3 years ago. So if you're trying to protect yourself and that's the guidance you're getting, you are starting from a position of basically zero. What do people actually try? A lot of things. Some of them are almost accidentally useful. Some of them make the situation actively worse. Wealthy people flee cities immediately, which honestly is pretty good advice, except that fleeing people carry the disease with them into the countryside and spread it further. Doctors start wearing those famous beak masks, long leather coats, gloves, and wide-brimmed hats. The beak is stuffed with herbs and flowers meant to filter out the miasma. This doesn't stop bacterial infection, but it does create some barrier between the doctor and infected patients, which is unintentionally not the worst idea. Bonfires are lit in streets to purify the air. Church bells are rung. People carry posies of herbs. None of this touches Yersinia pestis, but they don't know that. Now here's something really important that almost nobody brings up when they talk about the Black Death. The rats. Everyone knows rats were involved. What most people don't know is that the connection between rats, fleas, and the plague wasn't actually confirmed until 1898, when a French bacteriologist named Paul-Louis Simond figured it out in India during a later outbreak. Before that, for 5.5 centuries after the Black Death, nobody knew. The real transmission chain is this. Yersinia pestis lives in fleas. Fleas live on rats. When an infected rat dies, the fleas jump off looking for a new host. If you're nearby, congratulations, you're the new host. The flea bites you, regurgitates bacteria into your bloodstream, and within a few days, you have a bubo swelling under your armpit or in your groin the size of an apple. So in 1347, you're not avoiding rats. You're not thinking about fleas. You have no reason to. The enemy is invisible, and the vector is something everyone considers completely unremarkable background scenery. Let's talk about what the first few days feel like, because this matters for survival decisions. Initial symptoms look a lot like the flu. Fever, chills, headache, general misery. Nothing that screams immediate death yet. Then the buboes appear. Swollen, tender lymph nodes in your neck, armpit, or groin, depending on where you were bitten. They're hot to the touch. They turn black as they fill with dead tissue. This is where the name Black Death probably comes from, though historians still argue about that. At this stage, if it's purely bubonic and not septicemic, you have somewhere between a 30 and 60% chance of dying without any treatment. With the treatment available in 1347, which includes bloodletting, lancing the buboes, applying various herbal poultices, and praying, your odds don't improve dramatically. The bubonic form can actually be survived. The pneumonic form, once it reaches your lungs, kills almost everyone it touches. Here's where it gets really interesting, and also really dark. The social fabric of medieval Europe doesn't just strain under the plague, it basically dissolves. Giovanni Boccaccio, who lived through the outbreak in Florence in 1348 and wrote about it in the Decameron, describes a city where fathers abandon children, husbands abandon wives, neighbors refuse to help neighbors. He's not exaggerating for dramatic effect. The disease moves so fast, and the death toll was so massive that the normal structures of care and community completely broke down. Florence lost somewhere between half and 2/3 of its entire population in a single year. Think about that. Every other person you know dead, within 12 months. The gravediggers ran out. Bodies were stacked in the streets. Mass graves were dug outside city walls and filled faster than anyone expected. So what actually gives you a fighting chance? Here's the honest answer: distance and luck. Quarantine, even though nobody calls it that yet and nobody fully understands why it works, starts being used in some Italian port cities almost immediately. Venice, in 1348, begins requiring ships arriving from infected regions to anchor offshore for 30 days before anyone can disembark. By 1377, the city of Ragusa, which is modern-day Dubrovnik, formalizes this into a mandatory 30-day isolation period. It later gets extended to 40 days, and the Italian word for 40, quarantina, is where we get the word quarantine. If you're living in a rural area, you have better odds than city dwellers. Cities in the medieval period are essentially perfect disease environments. Dense populations, poor sanitation, rats everywhere, wells that share space with waste. The countryside has fewer people packed together, which means fewer chances for transmission. Some isolated communities, villages deep in the mountains, or in genuinely remote locations avoid the plague almost entirely. Not because they're doing anything medically sophisticated, just because the flea-carrying rats and infected travelers never reach them. Now here's something that doesn't get talked about enough. Some people survive direct infection. Not a small number either. The bubonic form has a meaningful survival rate even without real treatment. Somewhere around 40 to 70% of people who contract it actually recover, depending on the estimates and the region. Your immune system, if it's strong enough and you're lucky enough, can fight off Yersinia pestis on its own. And here's where it gets genuinely fascinating. Modern genetic research has found that a mutation called CC, or 5-delta-32, which is also the same mutation that provides resistance to HIV, appears at higher frequencies in populations descended from Europeans who survived the medieval plague outbreaks. Surviving the Black Death may have actually altered the genetics of every European alive today. The plague didn't just kill people, it selected for people. The ones who made it through passed something down. The Flagellants are worth a moment here, because they represent one of the stranger responses to the crisis. Starting in 1349, groups of men began traveling between towns, publicly whipping themselves with leather straps tipped with metal spikes, performing elaborate rituals of self-punishment meant to appease God and stop the plague. They drew massive crowds. They were genuinely popular for a while. The Pope condemned them in 1349, partly because they were spreading heretical ideas, and partly because, well, a group of bleeding, self-wounded people traveling from city to city during a major epidemic is not an ideal public health strategy. The flagellant movement largely collapsed within a year, but it tells you something important about the psychological state of a civilization watching itself die, with no explanation and no tools to stop it. Jewish communities across Europe were blamed for the plague. The accusation, completely fabricated, was that Jews had poisoned the wells. Pogroms swept through France, Spain, and the Holy Roman Empire. Entire Jewish communities were massacred in Strasbourg, Basel, Mainz. In 1348 and 1349 alone, more than 200 Jewish communities were destroyed. Pope Clement VI issued 2 papal bulls explicitly stating that Jews were not responsible and condemning the violence. It made limited difference. Fear and death and confusion looking for a target. That's a pattern that repeats across human history, and the Black Death is one of the most catastrophic examples of it. If you actually make it through the acute phase of infection and survive, you wake up into a world that is almost unrecognizable. Labor is suddenly scarce in a way it has never been before. When half the workforce dies, the workers who are left have leverage they've never had in their lives. Wages rise. Serfdom, which had kept peasants tied to land and lords across Europe for centuries, starts to crack. The feudal system doesn't collapse overnight, but the Black Death accelerates pressures that eventually break it apart. A peasant in 1360 who survived the plague can walk away from a bad lord and find better pay somewhere else, in a way that would have been impossible in 1340. Your survival, if you make it, lands you in a labor market that suddenly values your existence. The plague doesn't end in 1353 when the first major wave burns through. It comes back, over and over again for the next 3 centuries. The second wave hits in the 1360s. There are major outbreaks in the 1370s, the 1390s, all the way through the 17th century. The Great Plague of London in 1665 is the same disease. Yersinia pestis keeps cycling through Europe for 300 years after the Black Death. Some historians think Europe's population didn't fully recover to pre-plague levels until well into the 16th century, and in some regions it took even longer. This is not a one-time catastrophe you survive and move on from. It's a recurring horror that reshapes how people think about death, about God, about medicine, about the relationship between rulers and ruled. Medieval medicine isn't completely useless, to be fair. Surgeons who lance and drain buboes seem to improve outcomes in some cases, probably by reducing bacterial load and infection spread in the tissue. Some herbal preparations have mild antimicrobial properties. Certain physicians figure out, through observation alone, that staying away from sick people and keeping sick people isolated is associated with better survival. They don't know why. They have no theoretical framework for germ transmission. But empirical observation, even without explanation, still produces useful conclusions. The doctors who survive long enough to keep practicing get better at managing cases simply by watching what correlates with survival and what doesn't. Science happening before the word science exists, messy and incomplete and working from entirely wrong premises, but still trying. What actually ends the plague in Europe eventually is a combination of things. Quarantine procedures become more sophisticated and more widely adopted. The rat population itself gets hit hard enough in some regions that transmission chains break. Building practices slowly improve in ways that reduce rat habitat inside homes. And critically, Yersinia pestis itself may evolve toward less lethal strains over time, since a pathogen that kills its host too fast before it can spread is working against its own survival. By the late 17th century, the outbreaks are still happening, but they're smaller and more geographically contained. The last major Western European outbreak kills roughly half the population of Marseille in 1720. Then it retreats. But it doesn't disappear. Yersinia pestis is still out there. A few thousand cases are still reported worldwide every single year.